The Silence, the new horror film that everyone's been talking about because it is a sensory horror creature feature which can be seen as similar to some films such as Bird Box and A Quiet Place. But does The Silence say less about the film's message itself and more about horror and horror fans as a community and their dividing opinions on tension and how tension is held in horror films? Keep watching because I'm going to review this film and tell you what I thought, but I'm also going to introduce what I'm calling the Goldilocks theory. The film is based on the book of the same name by Tim Levin. The movie is directed by John R. Leonetti. You may know Leonetti for his directing work in Annabelle, Wish Upon, and The Wolves at the Door, but he is more renowned for his cinematography work. He's worked on such films as The Woods, Dead Silence, Insidious, and The Conjuring, to name a few. But The Silence is a whole new venture because it's a different subject matter completely. The film shows the journey of one family during an infestation of creatures that seem to attack at the sound of anything. But their family has a unique situation as they are able to communicate through sign language because of their daughter Ellie, who is deaf. This gives them an edge against the monsters. Hugh, the father, is played by Stanley Tucci, and he has to be one of my favorite characters because of how well-rounded he is. He shows conflict, purpose, and his intentions before the creature even attacked, so I felt like he was the character that was easiest to understand. The film also features some other familiar faces such as Miranda Otto, John Corbett, and of course the daughter, who is played by Kiernan from the recent Sabrina series. Obviously this leads me to the fact that Shipka is not a deaf actress and she is playing a deaf person. I have done a whole video on this with a YouTuber, Rikki Poynter, who is deaf and does a lot of videos about deaf awareness, and we talk about Hush and the way the character was portrayed, so I'm gonna leave that link down below if you're curious about that kind of thing. But I did really pick up a few things with her performance in this, and of course as a hearing person I am not the expert on this, but I did want to touch on the fact that she does whisper and talk quite at the same level as everyone else throughout the film. And of course, deafness is on a sliding scale, so it's not just 0 or 100, but I did find it was weird that throughout the film, the character Ali seemed to whisper when everyone else was whispering, or talk really loudly when everyone else was talking, and her voice really matched the same level. And I don't know if it's inaccurate, but it just kind of threw me off during the performances. I was also confused in general why her being deaf was such a big focus in the film. Obviously it's from the book and it's probably better explained in the book from what I can tell, but in the movie it didn't seem to have any effect on what happened, because although they did use sign language throughout the film, they also whispered pretty much the entire time. As I said, I felt like the purpose of having her there was so that the family had this edge because they could communicate without talking and using sign language, and they knew how to do that. But I felt like that was lost throughout the film. But with all of that aside, let's talk about the big issue and how they chose to present the danger and tension in the film, because this is very interesting. The thing is, The Silence did what Bird Box and A Quiet Place failed to do, or chose not to do. It explains the creatures, it explains the origin and how it all started, but does this hinder the horror, or does it intensify it? In Bird Box, this was something that was highly criticized by a large number of horror fans. They wanted more of a backstory and explanation of how the catalyst began. But in A Quiet Place, we are thrown in after the change has taken place. The Silence also shows the creatures in great detail from the beginning, and there is no mystery to what they are, or really like what they look like. We don't know exactly what they are. We know where they came from and why they're attacking, and they are shown throughout the entire film for large portions, in the background, in the foreground, everywhere. Where A Quiet Place held a mystery at the start of the film and only released the beast once we understood the family and their situation. There was a lot of mystery to the creatures, and they were only shown during the extreme parts of the film. While in Bird Box, it was all a mystery, and we know that the creature was cut from the film because they didn't want to kill the tension and they wanted to be a little bit more haunting, which some people disagree with. Again, people want to know what's going on, where it's coming from. I was actually a fan of not knowing. I thought it made it immensely scarier, and I thought it was probably the most scariest of these three films. But I do understand why a whole heap of horror fans actually wanted to know, and they needed that from the film, so they felt let down. So for me, this is a really cool conversation for us all to have and understand where we belong in the Goldilocks dilemma. Do we want too much information? Do we want no information? Or do we want it just right? Where do you sit? And what actually makes something more horrific for you? Is it the mystery and the unknowing, or do you need to know and you think that the facts and the details around the knowing and the information could be scarier than the monsters itself? It also goes with seeing the monsters. Do you want to see them outright? Do you think that that would make you more scared, or do you not want to see them at all? It's super interesting, and I think it's a really cool way to think of these films and really understand what scares you as a horror fan. For me, The Silence is a very average film with the same things we have come to expect in survival horror, but without the dramatics. And for me, the reveals of these creatures and their backstories result in a loss of tension. And these situations rarely have resolution, so you aren't quite sure what you're waiting for. But before we close the book on the Goldilocks dilemma, I do want to mention that The Silence does bring in something else. They've chosen to push the monsters aside as the core enemy and bring in an additional one: humankind. Again, this is not a new aspect. This was seen before in Bird Box. It's also seen in similar creature feature, The Mist, which is very cold-blooded. But in this film, it felt like they were pulling all the tension from the monsters and putting them onto this humankind. I'm not going to spoil what it is, but like these people, and it felt very forced and rushed and half-assed because it's done in the final act, and it just is, it's out of nowhere and it's bizarre, and I don't understand why the tension wasn't distributed a little bit more evenly throughout the film. But I think this is definitely a case of the adaptation probably not making too much sense. But for this film, when I'm looking at my watch and it's got 20 minutes to go and they've just introduced some new characters, it's bizarre and it felt very rushed. Speaking of rushed, I hope you guys like to be spoon-fed, because the voiceover for the ending is the most it's just a really sad excuse for finding a message in a film which is not there, and they're really shoving it down your throat. So good luck with that. I'm gonna give this film a 5 out of 10. I thought the acting was quite good, but it was just the tension was distributed in weird ways, and of course, you saw everything, and I felt like there was no mystery left in the film, and I like mystery. I'm gonna give this film a scare of 2 because it is not scary since you see the monsters, and originality, I'm gonna give it 3 because there's so many other films like this out there. What do you think about The Silence? Have you seen it? Have you read the book? Please let me know what it's like, and if it's similar, tell me about those aspects and how they work. Also, let me know where you sit with the Goldilocks theory. Are you more into the slow reveal? You like to see the monsters and everything, but you know, later in the film, like A Quiet Place? Or do you like not seeing anything? Or would you rather see the whole monster and know everything about it and hope that it has some interesting backstory? Let me know down below in the comments, and I'll talk to you guys very soon. Stay spooky.